On progress on a series of unresolved issues in talks on a post-Brexit trade deal.
This kind of mixed messaging, while it's confusing, considering that we're 5 to midnight on a deal with so much at stake, it's just not entirely surprising.
And concerns about potential brain injury linked to sliding sports such as the bobsled.
It's something which, if you don't look at it seriously and across the whole sport, essentially it's a potential time bomb for the future.
All here on the newsroom.
This is the BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is reported to be in hospital after testing positive for the coronavirus. Mr. Giuliani, who's 76, is understood to be receiving treatment in the Georgetown University Medical Facility in Washington. From Washington, Peter Bowes reports.
Rudy Giuliani is the latest member of Donald Trump's inner circle to contract the virus. No details of his condition have been made public. The president tweeted that his lawyer had tested positive while working tirelessly to uncover what he again called the most corrupt election in the history of the US. The former mayor of New York City has been exposed to the virus through contact with people known to have been infected as he traveled the country, leading Mr. Trump's legal challenges to the election results.
The deputy commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards has said a satellite-controlled machine gun fired from an unmanned vehicle was used to assassinate the country's top nuclear scientist last month. Here's Claire Runnikers.
Mohsen Fakhrizadeh and his wife were being driven in a convoy on a motorway east of Tehran with security guards when he was shot dead. The deputy commander of the Revolutionary Guards told local journalists that he was killed by a machine gun mounted on a pickup truck, which was operated using what he described as artificial intelligence. He said the weapon was fitted with an advanced camera, which was able to zoom in on the face of Mr. Fakhrizadeh, so that his wife, who was just 10 inches away, wasn't hit. Iranian authorities have blamed Israel for the assassination and have insisted that its nuclear activities are entirely peaceful.
Negotiators from Britain and the European Union have given differing interpretations of whether they're getting closer to agreeing a post-Brexit trade deal. Here's Nick Beake.
After receiving instructions from their respective corners, the two chief negotiators embarked on what could be one of the final rounds of this increasingly bruising encounter. Several EU diplomats told the BBC the two sides were close to resolving their disagreements over EU access to UK fishing waters. But a British government source said nothing new had been achieved. If fishing were to be resolved, it would still leave competition rules, including future government subsidies, and the policing of a deal as the remaining two hurdles to clear.
Firefighters on a holiday island in Australia say they may soon be unable to prevent a huge bushfire from advancing after they ordered residents in affected towns to leave immediately. The bushfire warning system on Fraser Island, a designated World Heritage Site off the coast of Queensland, has been raised to an emergency level. Thousands have joined a funeral ceremony for the former Uruguayan president Tabaré Vázquez, who died of lung cancer at the age of 80. Mr. Vázquez was a cancer doctor who campaigned tirelessly against the tobacco industry. BBC News. Romania's opposition Social Democrats have taken a narrow lead over the governing National Liberal Party as votes are counted following a parliamentary election. Nick Thorpe reports.
This was a disappointing result for Prime Minister Ludovic Orban and his National Liberals, but may prove just enough to remain in power. The opposition Social Democrats, who have dominated Romanian politics since the 1989 revolution, bounced back from a series of corruption scandals. Rural voters, in particular, accused the Liberals of incompetence in handling the coronavirus epidemic. Although the Social Democrats will get the first opportunity, a centre-right coalition, led again by the Liberals, is the most likely outcome.
Venezuelans have been voting to choose new members of the National Assembly, the only official body still controlled by the opposition. President Nicolás Maduro's Socialist Party is certain to regain control of the Assembly, as the opposition is boycotting the vote. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has described the poll as a fraud and a sham. Thousands of people have joined the funeral ceremony for the former Uruguayan president Tabaré Vázquez, who died of lung cancer at the age of 80. He became the country's first left-wing leader in 2005 when his coalition defeated the two traditional parties that had dominated Uruguayan politics. New research has found that 2/3 of the glaciers in the Alps of Europe are likely to disappear by the end of the century, with huge implications for human populations. The study calculated how fast the 4,000 glaciers of the Alps will retreat due to global warming caused by greenhouse gas emissions. This has serious implications for drinking water, for agriculture and power generation in the region, as well as also for the skiing industry. BBC News.
Hello, I'm Jackie Leonard, and you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has become the latest person in the president's inner circle to contract COVID-19. On Twitter, Mr. Trump wished Mr. Giuliani a speedy recovery after testing positive for what he called the China virus. US media are reporting that Mr. Giuliani, who is 76, is being treated in hospital. He had regularly been seen without a face mask, and on Wednesday had this exchange with a woman he was presenting as a witness at one of his hearings, arguing without evidence that the election which Mr. Trump lost last month was rigged.
Ms. Jacob?
Yes.
I don't want you to do this if you feel uncomfortable, but would you be comfortable taking your mask off so that people could hear you more clearly?
Speaking to NBC, the White House Coronavirus Task Force coordinator, Dr. Deborah Birx, criticized the Trump administration for flouting guidelines and peddling myths about the pandemic.
I hear community members parroting back that masks don't work, parroting back that we should work towards herd immunity, parroting back that gatherings don't result in super spreading events. And I think our job is to constantly say those are myths, they are wrong.
The US has seen record infections in recent days, but the scientist in charge of rolling out a COVID-19 vaccine, Monsef Slaoui, told CBS that he believes better days are coming.
We may start to see some impact on the most susceptible people probably in the month of January and February. But for our lives to start getting back to normal, we're talking about April or May. And therefore, it's absolutely vital that everybody take comfort in the fact that we have light at the end of the tunnel and find the energy in that to continue to wear our masks, distance, wash our hands.
Well, our North America correspondent is Peter Bowes, and he joins us now. First of all, Peter, what do we know about how Mr. Giuliani is actually doing?
We understand he is being treated in Georgetown University Medical Facility in Washington. The hospital hasn't issued a statement, but Mr. Giuliani's son, Andrew, he's a special assistant to the president, he has tweeted that his father is resting, getting great care, and feeling well.
And just how badly is the United States actually being hit by coronavirus right now?
Well, according to Johns Hopkins University, from last Thursday onwards, there were nearly 230,000 new infections every day. For 2 weeks, the US has regularly exceeded 2,000 deaths per day. And the great concern at the moment, Jackie, is that over the next week, there could be another surge as a result of people travelling during the Thanksgiving holiday. That was just over a week ago. So right now it really is worse than it's ever been.
We did hear some positive speech there from Monsef Slaoui saying that he thinks better days are coming. What are the next steps with the vaccine?
Well, yeah, better days are definitely coming. On Thursday, the Food and Drug Administration will consider whether to provide emergency use authorization for the vaccine that's been developed by Pfizer. And if it does, we understand that the first jabs could be available within 24 hours. And it's estimated 40 million doses of vaccines from both Pfizer and Moderna will be distributed by the end of this month. And priority is going to be given to 21 million healthcare workers, 3 million residents and staff of long-term care facilities here. So that is, as you say, it is on the horizon. Better times are ahead.
And you're in Los Angeles, aren't you? Large parts of California set to enter a new lockdown.
Yes, it is very bad here. 30,000 new cases just on Sunday around California. And yes, Los Angeles County, San Francisco area and counties around San Francisco are entering a new stay-at-home lockdown. It's not a complete lockdown, but certainly people, some 23 million people are going to be affected. This is the harshest lockdown anywhere in the United States.
Peter, thank you. That was Peter Bowie speaking to us from California. The killing of Iran's top nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh last month caused shockwaves inside and outside Iran. Officials in Tehran were quick to point the finger at Israel, but many questioned how it was possible that Iranian security couldn't protect a man who was described as being pivotal to Iran's nuclear program. Initially, Iranian officials said Mr. Fakhrizadeh had been killed in an ambush by several armed men, but that version of events changed, and on Sunday, the deputy commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Ali Fadavi, said the nuclear scientist was killed using a satellite-controlled machine gun. We heard more from Bahman Kalbasi, the New York correspondent for BBC Persian.
Latest versions of Iranian military officials as well as Supreme National Security Council, that basically there was not only nobody on the scene, but this machine gun was mounted on top of this pickup Nissan, and it shot the nuclear scientist as soon as he stepped out of his car or as he was sitting in the back of the car. That detail seemed to also have a few versions. The other thing that has been added is that the precision of this weapon and how it controlled, and this is what we've heard today, was so well done that nobody, including his wife, who was only centimeters away from him, was targeted. So the speculation or the explanation was that they used face recognition technology to target him only, and then, of course, the bodyguard who tried to throw himself on the line of fire.
This new story about it all being done by satellite, how do they know? What have they recovered?
They haven't actually given us any evidence of these claims, but what they have said is that the car self-detonated, the Nissan, that this was put on, that machine gun was put on that car and basically shot at Mr. Fakhrizadeh's car as soon as it arrived at the scene. And it's unlikely that we will ever receive supporting documents or evidence that this is really what happened. What is clear is that those who carried out this attack wanted the Iranian side to become more radicalized and respond in a way that would kill any possibility of diplomacy with the incoming U.S. administration. And that possibly, we can say, has achieved some of its goals, because the environment in Iran for new talks or a rapprochement with Biden administration is much more difficult than it was before the assassination.
Certainly, Iran has said that it will retaliate for this killing. What might we expect to see?
This was now carried out by Israel, according to Iranian government and some U.S. officials here who've spoken with the U.S. press. So the target apparently would now be Israel or its personnel or maybe even its diplomats. And therefore, there are targets that they could possibly go after. The question is, will they do it before January 20th, or will they wait in order to not give any pretense to the Trump administration for a last-minute military retaliation against Iran? So it's a matter of when, not matter of if.
That was Bahman Kalbasi of the BBC Persian service. You're listening to the BBC in London. Still to come on the newsroom, warnings that glaciers could disappear from the Alps. First, Fiona has the headlines.
President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is reported to be in hospital after testing positive for the coronavirus. And British and EU sources have given conflicting interpretations of progress towards a deal on fishing rights, a key unresolved issue in post-Brexit trade talks.
Yes, time is getting very tight. An agreement, if there is one, needs to be in place by the end of the year. The Irish Prime Minister Micheál Martin insisted on Sunday evening that a deal hung in the balance.
My gut instinct is that it's 50-50 right now, and I don't think one can be overly optimistic about a resolution emerging. And my sense is, having spoken to some of the key principals here, that this is a very challenging issue to resolve, and particularly around the level playing field.
Remember, if there's no agreement, the two sides will trade under World Trade Organization rules with tariffs and quotas imposed. That's what no deal would mean. We heard more from the BBC's Europe editor, Katia Adler, in Brussels.
We're getting mixed messages about fish. So there are some sources in the EU who are suggesting that the two sides are very close to finding agreement on fish. Some in the EU just say they can't say anything at the moment, and the government in the UK says this is absolutely not the case. I think this kind of mixed messaging, while it's confusing, considering that we're 5 to midnight on a deal with so much at stake, it's just not entirely surprising. What we do know is that on the other two outstanding issues, the two sides are still very far apart. And those two issues are the EU trying to get the UK to sign up to fair competition principles in exchange for preferential access to the single market. And what the EU means by fair competition is that it wants the UK to sign up to principles on government subsidies, for example, or environmental regulations or labour regulations, all of which add cost to businesses and their products. And the EU wants the UK to kind of keep in line with its own rules and regulations on this. Otherwise, the UK could have an unfair advantage. Now, the UK says after Brexit, it wants the freedom to make up its own rules and regulations, and it doesn't want to tie itself to a rule book with Brussels. And since the EU can see that, that's why it's insisting on the third outstanding issue, which is the governance of the deal. And what that basically means is to try and ensure both sides keep to their word, and if they don't, to make sure that you've got some, very strong immediate retaliatory action that can be taken. It's those issues that will make or break this deal. And these new intense negotiations, this next round, if you like, that ends tomorrow. So on Monday, there'll be another full day of negotiations. And after that, there'll be another conversation between the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, and Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And they'll take a decision then.
And Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen had an hour-long conversation on Saturday and came away from that with nothing. What's changed?
That's what we'd all like to know. Because, frankly, when it comes to the negotiators sitting opposite the table from one another again, they know these three issues that I was talking about inside out, because they have been thorny, difficult issues between the two sides from the word go in these negotiations. So we're talking March. So they're very well versed in each other's red lines. And unless those red lines are moving, and we're talking there difficult political compromises on both sides, there's no point in these conversations going on, because on a technical level, the dial is not going to move. You need these political compromises. You need the nod and the wink from the bosses of these negotiators to say, go on, do it, hold your nose and jump. And if both sides are ready to jump, then we could have a deal. And if they're not, it's unlikely we are going to see a deal this year.
That was Katia Adler. To Uganda now, where the opposition candidate for the presidency, Bobi Wine, has told the BBC that he and his supporters were again attacked by the police as he returned to campaign in Luka, where he was arrested last month. But speaking to my colleague James Kumarasamy, Mr. Wine said he wasn't giving up the fight to become the country's new leader.
It was a very good campaign. We had many more people, much more than we had on the day I was arrested. And indeed, many of them were wearing masks.
Well, that was the reason you were arrested, of course, was it not, originally, because the authorities said that you were breaching COVID regulations?
Well, the government says I was breaching COVID regulations, but it is clear to everybody that it was repression, because President Museveni goes ahead having rallies, goes ahead staging free music shows, as many as 10,000 people in one place. What President Museveni does not want is anybody else having support. And the support we have all over the country, it has been giving him sleepless nights. That explains why President Museveni is cracking down on us under the effects of the COVID-19.
But he let you and your supporters come out today and there were no problems?
Well, as I speak now, I am taking my close friend and confidant to hospital because he was hit with a tear gas canister today and very, very severely bruised. Not only that, many other colleagues that I work with, the police and the military has once again unleashed terror to us just about 2 hours ago and killing others.
Bobby Wine speaking to NewsHour. Researchers say all but a third of the glaciers in the European Alps are likely to have disappeared by the end of this century because of climate change, even under optimistic scenarios. Here's our science correspondent, Jonathan Amos.
There are around 4,000 glaciers in the Alps. Many are very small, but some, like the mighty Aletsch Glacier in Switzerland, stretch for miles. What they all have in common, however, is that they're melting as the climate warms. The glaciers are retreating and thinning, and a new EU-funded study, led by experts at Aberystwyth University, has tried to calculate how long they've got left. Using climate models, they've shown how the point on the glaciers where snow accumulation and melting equal each other will rise above the peaks of many alpine mountains during the rest of this century, effectively killing their glaciers. This has serious implications, not only for the continent's skiing industry, but also for drinking water, sanitation, agriculture and hydropower in the region.
That was Jonathan Amos. Now, Fiona has some of the other stories we're following today.
Here in Britain, the Royal Mint has released a new collection of coins celebrating the music legend David Bowie. One coin, which features the musician's famous lightning bolt design, has been to space, as Anna Aslam explains.
Ground control to Major Tom.
David Bowie released his song Space Oddity 5 days before the Apollo 11 launch in 1969, which landed the first man on the moon. He also wrote the hits Lady Stardust, Starman, and Life on Mars. In honor of the singer's career, the Royal Mint has put a small group of collectible coins up for sale. One silver coin was even launched into space and orbited the Earth's atmosphere for 45 minutes before coming back down to be offered as a prize to a random winner on the Mint's Facebook page. But if you're not lucky, fans can also buy the coins at prices from just $18 to nearly $100,000.
Hong Kong police say they're investigating a pro-democracy politician who fled abroad last week. They suspect that Ted Hui of breaking the territory's Beijing-imposed security law and of money laundering. Indonesia has lodged a diplomatic protest with Britain after a Papuan separatist leader living in the UK declared an interim government and himself as president.
Fiona, thank you. Now let's get some sports news with Andy Barwell.
And Tottenham Hotspur show that they mean business by returning back to the top of the English Premier League table. They beat their North London rivals Arsenal 2-0 to the delight of the Spurs boss, Jose Mourinho.
The problem with the Premier League is that the next match is against Crystal Palace and we don't have any guarantee that we are going to bring points. I believe that the public and the ones at home in front of the screen, the Tottenham fans, they are also enjoying the moment, and for one more week we are going to be top of the league, so it's good fun.
Liverpool moved level on points with Spurs. Jurgen Klopp's team, though, a second on goal difference, despite beating Wolves 4-0 in front of a limited number of fans back at Anfield. And Klopp was a happy manager.
We got minute by minute better and better, to be honest. We controlled the game more. We played in the spaces they didn't want us to play, and the boys were. But was just a good game.
Well, Leicester beat the bottom club Sheffield United 2-1. Crystal Palace put 5 goals past West Bromwich Albion. Real Sociedad stayed second in Spain's La Liga after drawing 0-0 at Alaves. Villarreal went third, and AC Milan extended their lead at the top of Italy's Serie A to 5 points with a 2-1 victory over Sampdoria. Well, drama in the penultimate race of the Formula One campaign. No world champion Lewis Hamilton because of coronavirus for the Sakir Grand Prix. And his replacement, George Russell, looked to be on course for a fairy tale win. But mistakes from Mercedes in the pits and a punctured tyre late on saw him finish 9th behind Sergio Perez and the Racing Point team, who had their first Formula One success. But Russell was remarkably calm after the race.
I felt confident, comfortable in the opening laps, just managing the gap to Valtteri. And then obviously we had the muddle up in the pit stop. That put us on the back foot. I had to overtake him, and obviously I think we still could have caught Sergio. We had such a tyre advantage. The car was so quick. Gutted, but incredibly proud of what we've achieved and happy to have had the opportunity.
And that's the latest sports news.
From Andy Barwell. Thanks, Andy. And staying with sport, brain injury in sport has attracted a lot of attention in recent weeks, but much of it's been focused on football and rugby. Now, though, there's growing concern that athletes in Olympic sliding sports, especially bobsled and skeleton, are at risk of long-term brain injury. Experts are worried about the effects of repetitive vibrations at high speed. More from our sports news correspondent, Alex Capstick.
The track is clear, the skeleton start.
I do have a headache probably every day, which I see as normal now. Obviously, it's not normal.
Ellie Furneaux was a rising star in skeleton, a winter sport in which athletes lie face down on a tiny sled as they shoot down the ice.
I remember looking up very slightly, probably only a couple of centimetres actually off of the ice, looked up and ended up getting my head completely smashed into the ice. Everything went black, and that was all I can really remember for a long time. I just basically slept for about a month. I couldn't really speak. I had short-term memory loss.
It was that crash in Germany nearly 3 years ago that would end her sliding career. Ellie's still suffering from the effects. As well as the daily headaches, there's neck pain and dizziness. Ellie described it as a freak accident, but there's mounting evidence to suggest it doesn't necessarily take a big wipeout for sliding athletes to get brain damage.
It's something which, if you don't look at it seriously and across the whole sport, then essentially it's a potential time bomb for the future.
Professor Peter McCarthy, a neurophysiologist from the University of South Wales, has been studying subconcussive trauma caused by the vibrations and G-forces during a standard skeleton or bobsled run.
The major issues are that unless a person gets concussed, it's unlikely that any of the basic head and neck issues will be addressed and the person will be allowed to continue. You shouldn't be putting people into a sport where you're putting them at risk, not necessarily straight away, but maybe later on in life, and you're going to lead to some form of disability.
Bob in track, bobsleigh 출발했습니다. bobsleigh 출발했습니다.
The issues come under the spotlight in North America, where since 2013, 3 former elite bobsledders have taken their own lives. Another slit his wrist, but was saved by his girlfriend. They'd all been combating forms of depression and other psychological difficulties. Can you explain what the term sledhead means?
It's just the rattling of the head, the kind of a brain fog that people get. It makes sense because, honestly, the ride is violent, and there's nowhere...
Christina Smith represented Canada in bobsled at the 2002 Winter Olympics.
I mean, I was losing attention. I was getting scattered. When you're starting to slowly deteriorate, it's really upsetting. And then people, of course, feel depression and different things that come from that.
Are you absolutely convinced that there is a link with the knocks to the head, the rattling of the brain, and subsequent long-term psychological difficulties that we've seen in recent years?
Absolutely. The micro vibrations, the micro concussions do accumulate. And that's something that people are not thinking about.
But proving that link is far from straightforward. So while the science catches up, the big question is whether the sports authorities are doing enough to protect their athletes. The International Federation told us there are strict protocols in place for concussion, but there's been no extended study into brain injuries.
That was Alex Capstick. Quick reminder of our main world news at the moment. President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is reported to be in hospital after testing positive for the coronavirus. I'm Jackie Leonard. You've been listening to The Newsroom from the BBC in London.
Now let's look ahead to what's coming up here on the BBC World Service. In half an hour, we look at the life of the writer Alexandre Dumas.
Most historians, novelists and playwrights belong to the middle class. And the middle class, the bourgeoisie, was a big beneficiary of the French Revolution and what followed.
At 8 GMT, it's Hard Talk. Here's Stephen Saka.
My guest is the leading brain surgeon, Owais Gilani, who made headlines around the world when he separated Pakistani twins joined at the head. What motivates a doctor to embrace the most physically and ethically demanding life and death surgery?
At 9:30, the conversation is between 2 yoga teachers.
I feel like more and more women are attracted to that aspect, taking you beyond just the body and the mind and taking you to a place of finding peace and calm every single day.
That's all still to come here on the BBC World Service.
Coming up on the climate question, record-breaking storms have devastated Nicaragua.
Everything here is destroyed. I can see a children's shoe that is in the middle of this pile of what we can think is garbage, but all of these were the most valuable assets of hundreds of families.
What, if any, is the link to climate change? And how can we be better prepared? Answers after the news.
BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is reported to be in hospital after testing positive for the coronavirus. He's understood to be receiving treatment in the Georgetown University Medical Facility in Washington. The deputy commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards has said a satellite-controlled machine gun fired from an unmanned vehicle was used to assassinate the country's top nuclear scientist last month. He said no human agents were present when Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was killed. Negotiators from Britain and the European Union have given differing interpretations on whether they're getting close to agreeing a post-Brexit trade deal. EU officials say they have almost overcome one of the key obstacles, an agreement on fishing rights, but the British side has denied this. Australian firefighters have warned that they may soon be unable to stop the advance of a major wildfire on a renowned holiday island. The bushfire warning system on Fraser Island, off the coast of Queensland, has been raised to emergency level. Romania's opposition Social Democrats have taken a narrow lead over the governing National Liberal Party as votes are counted following a parliamentary election. However, it's unlikely that the opposition will take charge, as Prime Minister Ludovic Orban's party has more potential allies. Thousands of people have joined a funeral ceremony for the former Uruguayan president Tabaré Vázquez, who died of lung cancer. Mr. Vázquez was a cancer doctor who campaigned tirelessly against the tobacco industry during his 2 terms in power. And new research has found that 2/3 of the glaciers in the Alps of Europe are likely to disappear by the end of the century. This has serious implications for drinking water, agriculture and power generation in the region, as well as the skiing industry. The Alps has 4,000 glaciers. BBC News.
Welcome to the climate question from the BBC World Service. From the science to the politics and everything in between, we're your guide to the burning issue of our time. I'm Neil Rizal.
And I'm Gray Jackson. This week, the record-breaking hurricane season in the Atlantic.
Oh, something just flew off. Look out, guys, look out! Look out, look out, look out!
The storms started coming earlier than normal.
Tropical Storm Arthur has become the first named storm of the year.
And kept coming.
Tropical Storm Bertha,
Cristobal, Dolly,
Edward,
Faye, Gonzalo,
Hannah, Isaias, Josephine.
And coming.
We now have Tropical Storm Wilfred.
There were so many, they ran out of names. And so they had to switch to Greek.
Tropical Storm Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta. Hurricane Epsilon, which is now...
The storms have brought death, destruction, and a dire warning from the UN Secretary General.
The state of the planet is broken. Central America is still reeling from 2 back-to-back hurricanes, part of the most intense period for such storms in recent years.
So what is the link between climate change and hurricanes?
Are they going to get worse? And if so, how do we prepare for that?
Humanity is waging war on nature. This is suicidal. Nature always strikes back, and it is already doing so with growing force and fury.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' apocalyptic language has grabbed headlines, and we're going to look at the political significance of his speech a bit later. But first, let's focus on that force and fury.
We can see it vividly in Central America and Nicaragua, where our reporter has traveled to the heart of a disaster zone just over a week after Hurricane Iota hit.
My name is Alfonso Flores Bermudez. I'm a journalist. I'm Nicaraguan. I'm standing on the shore in front of Puerto Cabeza City, which was the first place hit by Hurricane Eta first, and then Hurricane
Iota, just 13 days after. Everything here is destroyed. I can see a children's shoe that is in the middle of this pile of what we can think is garbage, but all of these were the most valuable assets of hundreds of families.
She got something to say.
Sorry, what's your name? ¿Cuál es tu nombre?
Bernita Alvarado, Washington.
Okay.
Because I don't have house. My house.
What happened with your house?
We carried with the hurricane.
You lost it.
I lose. I have 12 children. And I is madre soltera.
You're a single mother.
Only me, mother.
What's the most urgent things you need here?
Food, water, and I want to make my house, and I can't build right now because I don't have money.
Food, water,
materials. I want help. I want help. I beg. I lost everything. I lost everything.
It's so hard to imagine what these people are going through, and I know the whole region has been totally devastated by these two hurricanes. I read that after Iota, 6 people were reported to have been dragged away by rivers, and more are missing after a landslide when 6 families were buried. I mean, it may be no surprise then to hear, after all this destruction, that Nicaragua's president has described Iota as the strongest hurricane to hit the country ever.
Yeah, I mean, it's really surprised even the leading experts on hurricanes. The U.S. National Hurricane Center, which really tracks these things, they knew it was going to be a powerful storm. But in the space of just a few hours on November 16th, just before it hit Nicaragua, they describe, in one of their warnings, an explosive and rapid development of this storm when the winds really escalated.
Yeah, but thankfully there was still enough time to get the word out and evacuate some people.
It seems that this neighborhood specifically that carry a long history of, let's say, not a good relationship with the current government, has been the last one to receive help. But in some other areas, the military went to evacuate people.
I know you've been there a lot in the past few weeks reporting, and you've been speaking to lots of people there too. What has been their experience over the last 2 weeks?
Well, I'm actually next to Saddam Vinicius. He's one of the fishermen that lives here.
I see it with my eye. That night, when I spotting with the flashlight from the back there, and I watching how the sea wave was coming like a tsunami. I see the sea wave come high and start mashing down all these pieces of house. Drop down like 10 concrete house. Everything was mashed up there.
Neil, Brian.
Those waves sounded terrifying. I was just imagining what that would be like, home alone and just wondering whether you were going to get pulled out to sea or not. That must have been horrible.
And the image there of him going out with his flashlight into the kind of violent darkness and hearing what the sound of the waves must have been like, and seeing house after house, concrete house, which is really shocking, being mashed down, as he said, being crushed.
Yes, it was a terrible experience for people here.
So, if we're going to be prepared for these storms and understand the connection, if there is one, to climate change, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. What is a hurricane? How are they formed?
So hurricanes, cyclones, typhoons, they're all the same thing. Scientists like to call them tropical cyclones. They're a bit like a giant machine fueled by warm, moist air, and that's why they can only form in the tropics, where the oceans are warmer.
But why do they spin?
So, to get to that, I think we need to go to the very birth, the origin story of a hurricane. So, all this warm, moist air above the ocean, it rises into the atmosphere. And as a result, air is sort of sucked in from the surrounding area to replace it. And then this new air also warms and rises. All this warm, moist air rises and rises, and as it does, it cools down, and the water in the air forms clouds and rain. This process keeps going and going, fed by the warm oceans below, and so the storm grows stronger and stronger and spins faster and faster.
Right, so the process kind of feeds itself.
Yeah, it's self-perpetuating.
Okay.
And so when wind speeds reach 119 kilometers an hour, it becomes a tropical cyclone. Category 5 is the strongest storm and absolutely catastrophic. That's the type of thing that blows buildings and trees away with wind speeds of 250 kilometers an hour. And these powerful winds, they have another effect. They push the seawater towards the coast and they create something called a storm surge, basically a big wave that can be 5 or 6 meters high.
It makes you think, how can a country prepare for something like that?
Yeah, I know, right? So the first thing and really important thing is good weather forecast systems, because if we have good weather forecast systems, we can warn people that a storm's coming.
Right, but the best forecast in the world is useless if people aren't taking it seriously. And this can be a real problem. Not so much in terms of evacuating people, but in terms of being genuinely prepared for something like this. I spoke to Alice Hill about this. She used to advise President Obama on resilience, which is like the jargon for being ready for big, bad, foreseeable events. She's since written a book about it, and she started by telling me the story of Hurricane Andrew, which hit Florida in 1992.
That hurricane swept across the state and flattened many neighborhoods. It carried wind speeds that had not previously been experienced in Florida.
Well, this is incredible. It has just flattened this area. This can only be described as total devastation. If they're going to declare any place in America a disaster, it would have to be this one.
And prior to its striking, the estimate of the loss by insurers was maybe $4 to $5 billion. It cost something like $15 billion. That threw a number of insurers into bankruptcy and caused a crisis within the state. And that moment was the birth of catastrophe modeling, the modeling that allows you to look ahead and predict how bad events could be in the future and thus figure out what your potential loss is as an insurer. And so the state of Florida adopted the strongest wind codes in the United States up to that time. And once they were able to accomplish that, that meant that Florida became a lot safer when it suffered future hurricanes, and that has continued to this date.
Neil, can I just interrupt? Wind codes, what are they?
Okay, she's talking about building standards. For example, the Florida Building Code describes high velocity zones, which are places near the coast where hurricanes are strongest and there'd be debris whizzing all about. In places like that, the code says that windows have to have shutters or impact-resistant glass.